Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Grace Series Talk. This month we have the honor to have Dr. Alice Wang as our speaker. Dr. Alice Wang received her bachelor, master, and PhD from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science. After her PhD, she spent 8 years at Texas Instruments, 7 years at MediaTek, working on low power circuit for advanced mobile processor, and 5 years at a startup called Everactive. Right now, Dr. Alice Wang is an assistant professor of instruction at Computer Science Department at UTD. Her work on low power technology has been showcased in more than 30 IEEE publications, and she published 2 books. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiti. Thanks for the invitation, and just want to thank all of you for staying so late. And I know the message just went out like today. So thank you so much for being here. I hope we'll have a little fun. It's not going to be a very serious technical talk. Mostly just want to share my experience. The title is Rising to the Top of Industry Through Innovation. So I spent most of my career in except I just started teaching this year. So this is my first year teaching. So most of my career has been in industry, going up these corporate ladders. And so it's a very, ups and downs. So I'd like to share my journey with you and a little bit of the technical things as well, the innovation that achieved throughout my career. So I hope we'll have some fun. And, if you have questions, of course, you can stop me. All right, so just to repeat what Kiti already said, so I started out my education at MIT. I got all 3 of my degrees there, my bachelor's, my master's, my PhD. I worked in very low power electronics, and I didn't want to work really. I'd done a few internships, but I realized school is just most fun. So I tried to stay in school as long as possible, and then finally I had to graduate. So I had to leave. So after my my education, then I came to Texas for the first time here. So I got a job in TI in the smartphone division. This is back when they still had a smartphone division, and they were making fancy smartphones just like the iPhone. And then spent about 7 years here in Dallas. And then I decided I wanted to do something internationally. So I'm born and raised in the US. I'd never lived or worked outside of the US. And so I thought that'd be a great challenge. So I worked for a company called MediaTek, which is based in Taiwan, the headquarters. And at first I was in their Austin site, but then after a year, they sent me on an expat. So I spent 4 years in Taiwan. Very challenging because my Mandarin is really not very good. And so I thought I was much better, but when I went there, I realized, no, my Mandarin is like a little kid's. But it's okay because Taiwanese people are very friendly. They let me speak English, and I actually spoke English in meetings. I could understand enough. So it was a great experience. I highly recommend anyone who hasn't worked outside of their home country to do so. It's a big challenge. Just opens your eyes up to the big world, because I really thought the US was like the center of the universe. So that changes that perspective. And then once I was done working overseas, I decided I wanted to have a California experience. So I did get into Stanford and Berkeley, but I decided to stay at MIT for my PhD. So I'm always thinking, oh, I didn't get my California experience. Isn't that where all engineers go, Silicon Valley? And so I requested a transfer to come back to the California site. And after a year in California, then I joined a startup. I also never had an experience in a small company. I'd been in big, large corporations, so I wanted that experience. And so I moved into a company called Psychic. It's like we're reading your minds, wireless technology, so psychic, But anyway, that's was a company started by two of my friends, my classmates at MIT. And what's great is we were using our research, what we had done in our PhD, now applying to products. That was exciting. Of course, the name clearly like made up by engineers. It's like so nerdy. And eventually they had to rebrand because nobody could find the company. You can't like, you're a psychic. How do you spell it? Or how do you say it? Is it psychic? Or anyway, so they had to change the name to Everactive. And at Everactive, I was the vice president of hardware there, helping to develop their products. And then most recently, I came back to Texas first, right before the pandemic, and became a remote worker. And because now my family is all in Dallas. And then, most startups don't really survive. I think 90% startups don't survive. And so in 2023, they ran out of money. And so I got a big severance package. And I had started teaching adjunct digital logic here at UTD, and then suddenly I had more free time, and so I'm now teaching full-time here starting this year, so my first year. So that is my journey. I'm going to talk more about each piece of it in more detail, spend more time in the college part since most of you are closer to that, but also share some of my experience in working and how I went from individual contributor to a manager to an executive and now teaching it. I think that's it's a pretty interesting journey. Okay. So normally when you're thinking about, your education or your work experience, you think there are these ladders. So conventionally you think, I start out in college, I'll get my bachelor's, I might get my master's and go up this education ladder and possibly get a doctorate. Or maybe once you graduate, you go work for a company and you start going up their technical ladder, which might be starting out as a junior engineer and get promoted to senior engineer and so on. And hopefully, if you do a lot of amazing work at the top of the technical ladder is a fellow. That's like the highest achievement in a company technically. Or maybe somewhere along the way, you find out you like leadership, you like leading people. And so they'll move you over to another ladder, what you call the management ladder. And you start going up that ladder. You start out as a manager, maybe get promoted to director, vice president. And of course, the very top of the management ladder is the CEO, only one of those. So that's conventional thinking, and probably you're all feeling like you're on that path. Now you're going through this bottom ladder, getting your bachelor's or maybe your master's or PhD. But in reality, what it is a very long and windy road. I love this picture of this road. It's like so windy and, it's going up and down. And so it's not really going up all the time. And it's actually a very long winding road, lots of bumps, lots of ups, but also lots of downs. And so when we think about rising to the top of each ladder, it's not such a linear passage. Okay, so starting out at MIT, and a lot of people ask me why did I choose to go to MIT, and I always say that there were like three main reasons. One was, I really didn't enjoy high school that much. I felt kind of out of place, didn't really belong. So I thought at MIT, I'm going to find like other nerds like me, find my tribe, love them hard. And so that was one reason why I chose MIT. I was actually deciding between Princeton and MIT because I wanted to be a physicist. I had done very well in AP physics in high school and thought that's my path. I'm going to be a physicist. And physics at Princeton is very famous. I think that's where Albert Einstein went. So I'm like, I'm going to go to Princeton, and actually got in early action. So that's the way I was going to go. And I grew up in the Northeast, so we all kind of applied to all the Ivy Leagues and MIT. So that's a pretty normal thing for my high school. So I thought, okay, once I got into MIT, I didn't really think I was going to go there. until I went for campus preview weekend and was hanging out with the other freshmen. And they were like talking to us until like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, oh my gosh, they seem to have a lot of fun here, you know? Like I thought it would be like super hard, but it looks like it'll be really fun. And so that was the second reason why I thought of MIT. For me, I think I'll have a lot of fun. And then I thought it must be kind of easy because look, they're talking to us until like 4 o'clock in the morning. And he said he had some kind of essay due, but he's not doing it. Oh, it must be easy. So that was the third reason why I went to MIT. All very serious reasons, but two of them paid off, but third one completely wrong. It's not easy at all. I was really shocked when I went there and was like, oh my gosh, I'm no longer, you know, in my high school, I was in the top 10, but at MIT, I was no longer at the top. So I think I still really, it was a really great experience, but maybe the reasons why I decided to go there were more superficial, but it was very difficult. And then the question is, why did you choose EECS? Well, like I said, I wanted to be a physicist. I was like, I did really well in EP physics. I'm going to go do physics. And then as soon as I got there, I'm like, I'm going to take the hardest theoretical physics classes possible. And they basically kicked my butt. And not only that, but I met other classmates that were just brilliant, like these geniuses. They were my classmates at MIT. And I realized, okay, my brain just does not think like the way these students think. And so after a year of trying my best to become a physicist at MIT, I took a computer programming class because actually at MIT, course 6, which is EECS, is the most popular major. Lots of people are taking that class. So I'm like, I'm going to take it. And I took it and I just had so much fun. So I'm like, well, struggling or fun. And so I switched into EECS and that started my path in EECS. And I'm more of a hardware person. You'll hear in my career. And so that's why I chose EECS. But it was my pipe dream to be a physicist. But it's not going to happen. Okay. So my life at MIT, I would say probably the main key or one of the really big important things that I had for success is our internships. So I was in a program where we started having internships in sophomore year, and I was at Bell Labs at the time, a very famous research institution that later got turned into Lucent Technologies. And so I got to work every summer at Bell Labs. It was really great fun doing research. I started making money because they pay you as if you're like an engineer. And so I made more money in the summers to like fund my fun time during the rest of the year where I didn't have any income. But all of the internships I did, both in undergrad and grad school, really did map out a lot of where I am today. So because I did those internships at Lucent, I ended up getting a graduate Ph.D. fellowship from Lucent. And what that allowed me is that now I can go to any school and talk to any professor. They don't have to fund me anymore. I was kind of a free agent, and that was a great thing to have. Then I did an internship at Texas Instruments. I got to experience the Texas summers, which was horrible. But the benefit of that was after my PhD, they gave me an offer to work there. And that's when that's what I decided to do. Got to work on low power smartphones. And then my third internship was also as a grad student at IBM TJ Watson Research Labs, also very famous research lab. And while I was there, I discovered low voltage circuits. And I was just kind of doing some simulations of circuits. And I thought, oh, this is really neat. And then, but once I came back and told my advisor about it, he's like, you need to change your thesis and, you know, pivot and change to this. I was about a year out from graduating at that point, but that extended my thesis by another year. but it was really worth it. And I'll show you more about my thesis in the next slide. But overall, I really think these working experience, they set up your network, right? So now you've got a network beyond the school. And through that, I can reach out to my different bosses at these companies. They're willing to help me. So I really believe getting internships was really key to my success. Okay, so my PhD, so what I, at IBM Research, what I discovered was that if you lower the voltage, so this chart here is supply voltage or VDD versus energy. I discovered that if you lower the voltage, sure, the energy will go down and actually goes down VDD squared, which is very good. So, you know, if you care about the environment or climate change, lower the voltage, your energy consumption goes down. But there is this spot where it starts to go back up again, where that is where leakage and switching energy kind of crossover. And traditional circuits operate up here, maybe 3 volts, maybe at best 1 volt. But what my research found out is that a minimum energy point was somewhere like 0.3 volts, very, very low voltage that had never really been operated at before. And so that's what I figured out at IBM. And my advisor's like, you need to make a chip that does that. I'm like, oh my goodness. And it became like, well, I knew I could graduate if I just continued on, but if I took on this project, it could be a big failure. So that was what I thought in my mind. And so I decided, I should just go big, you know, go for something very risky. And hopefully I'll be proud at the end of it, even if it failed big. And so I did that. If you want to operate at this point here, you have to build it so that it goes all the way down here. So my goal was to operate at 0.1. I didn't quite make it. So my chip, which was an FFT processor, ran down to 180 millivolts. It's pretty good. And it was like the first time in industry that's been done. And so out of my PhD, I had a chip and a paper written on it, but also myself, my advisor, and another student, we wrote the first book on sub-BT logic. And then lots of papers since then have been written on this topic. And so very proud of this. So during MIT, like I said, there was lots of ups and downs. I constantly had to give myself these pep talks. For example, one thing I learned, one key learning was that I had to turn on my brain. I know that sounds really obvious, but apparently in high school, I wasn't really using my brain. It was maybe too easy, I don't know. But at MIT, I was like, oh my gosh, I actually have to think and understand concepts. And so that was very important learning from college, is that my brain, very important, and have to turn it on in order to do well. Second thing, as I mentioned, is going from like a high school where I was in the honors, you know, top 10 of the class, to at MIT, I'm like, ooh, I just want to be slightly above average. That was my goal. So I didn't put too much pressure on myself to like be the top of the class or to get all A's. Okay, if I can just be, you know, slightly above average in this really amazing group of people, then I would be happy. So those are the kind of things I had to tell myself to like get through the stress. And then finally in my PhD, I just hang in there, you know, either they're going to kick you out or they'll give you a PhD and you get to leave, you know. So I didn't stress out too much about the PhD. I just kind of dug in and hang in there. So I don't know, those are the kind of things that you tell yourself to kind of get through a very challenging education. But those are things I learned from my time at MIT. Okay, so after my PhD, I decided not to stay in academia. I decided to go to work. And I worked at Texas Instruments starting in 2004. The reason why I chose TI was, number one, it was a big company and they were still investing in research. So I could still, publish papers. I can still go to conferences and be in the academic circle and also get a, paycheck, which is very nice. And so I just wanted to have that door open in case I want to have an academic career later on down the road. And so that's why I joined Texas Instruments. It was also a really great time for low power at TI, because until then, mobile phones didn't really need to have any low power circuits. The power was still pretty low. However, around when I joined was when the 90 nanometer, this is process technology, when the 90 nanometer has leakage here, went to leakage here, which is about a 10x increase in leakage. And that's when companies like TI, Nokia, they said we need to start implementing low power in our phones. These low power techniques, they've been in research. I know because my group was doing the research. Finally, it's time for it to go from research into a product. And so that's when I joined and I got to be a part of helping to solve this big 10x leakage problem. What is leakage? It's basically like static power draining from the chip. And so it doesn't do anything useful. And so how do we reduce it? So we did a lot, we threw a lot of our low power circuits at it, like turning off the power when it's idling, adjusting the voltage and so on. Nothing as extreme as my PhD, not down to 180 millivolts, but lowering it. And a lot of the circuits that I designed went into cool phones. Like at the time, this candy bar, the Nokia candy bar was very, very popular. And also this Palm Pilot is also popular, but they don't exist now anymore. But it was really exciting to see that when we added these low power circuits, we were able to achieve and lower the power 10x back to where it was in 90 nanometer and basically maintain the same leakage as the previous node. So those technologies from Texas Instruments were called Smart Reflex. That's their branding. And when I joined, I was on a team that did the very first technique called adaptive voltage scaling. And we did it in 90 nanometer to prove it before we applied it to 65 nanometer process technology. The basic idea is that when you build a chip, it's not going to be like exactly on the spec that you want it to be. There's some variation because you don't build things perfectly. So even though your goal is 1 gigahertz processor, some may come out and be 900 megahertz. Some might come out faster and like 1.1 gigahertz. So there's a spread of frequency in all chips. But unfortunately, when you buy it and you say it's going to be 1 gigahertz, you have to guarantee it's 1 gigahertz. So all those parts that are running slower, running at 900 megahertz, I'm going to increase the voltage to speed them up. And unfortunately, the power will go up once you increase the voltage. And so what this low power technique does is it figures out, okay, is this a fast chip or is this a slow chip? If it's a slow chip, we got to raise the voltage, fine. But if it's a fast chip, I don't want to keep it at that high voltage. I'm going to lower the voltage and get power savings. So that is the technology that we implemented in 90 nanometer. You can see here, this is the distribution of the different chips. Like most of them are going to be in the center at around the mean, but there's a significant, 5% at these tail that we still want to ship them. We want to sell them because if we throw them away, that's wasting money. But when we ship them, their power is going to be really high. So what we can do is for the very slow chips, I'm going to run them at 1.2 volts. But for the very fast chips, I can run them at 0.6 volts, so much lower, and also get much lower power. And that's something that never been done before. And so what we had to do is put little sensors on our chips to detect what's the speed, and then we can adjust the voltage that way. So that was very exciting to be part of that team. What did I learn from my time in TI? I learned a lot about working. I don't think internships, I think they treat you really, really well in internships. So it's not the same as, working at a job. But I think going into a workplace is what I learned a lot about at TI. I learned how to make chips that were something you can sell. What I did in my PhD was, what I could do to graduate, but the quality was not very good. So I learned about how to make good quality digital circuits. And then I also had to learn about how to test them. Didn't have to do that much in my PhD. So all these sophisticated testing equipment. But then what happens typically when you're working, and let's say you do a very good job on a project, then they'll give you more things to do. And potentially what they will want you to do is to lead projects. And so after a couple of years, then I became a project lead. So I, had a team of maybe 10 engineers. I wasn't their manager. I was just their technical lead, but I had to now understand how the schedules work, how do spreadsheets work, and how to deal with these people. And that's something that I never really got to learn that much in school. In school, I was focused on my education, focused on my PhD project, focused on my thesis, but only when I started working, then I had to learn about people skills. But one thing I also did learn is that a lot of times the people who become leaders or rise to the top it's not because they're asking for it, it's because they're already a leader technically or a leader of people just in their day-to-day activities. So if you're thinking like, oh, someday I want to be a leader or a manager or rise up in a company, it really is how do you be a leader in what you're doing today? And so in the beginning, it was just making my voltage scaling chip work, learning about RTL and learning about testing, making sure that I was the leader of that. And, my manager recognized that, then promoted me to project lead. Then I was like, okay, well, now I have to learn this, become the top of that. And so all of us have things in our life that we are owners of. And for you, it might be your class work. For me, it's my teaching, so we really just have to be the top of whatever we're doing and whatever's been placed in our lives. And, the success comes from that. So my advice is just to be the top of whatever has been placed before you, and you will naturally rise to the top. Other things I had to learn is rising over some of my internal barriers. So I didn't realize this, but I have a lot of negative self-talk. So this cartoon just shows what imposter syndrome means. So this person's getting an award and, should be celebrating. They're getting an award, but meanwhile, in their head, they're thinking, I could have been anyone, me, or I just worked hard, or it was luck, or I'm a fraud. And actually, I think I've had all those thoughts at some point, during my career, and having a lot of like these imposter syndrome thoughts. And it's just something I have to keep working at. Like anytime I detect negative self-talk, I often do say, oh, they're like, you went to MIT, you're like, you must be so smart. And I'm like, no, I just work hard, or, I have to catch myself because I really, just recognize that I did achieve a lot and not to minimize it. And sometimes I think all of this negative self-talk was a barrier for me more than anything else. It prevented me from pushing myself more or trying to, go for more. And so that's just something to watch out, is that internal barriers. For women, they say there's this glass ceiling but sometimes there's a drop ceiling that's below the glass ceiling that will hit against before we even get to the glass ceiling. And so that's something, just overcoming any internal barriers that prevent you from rising to the top. And finally, developing soft skills. This is something that, at least when I was getting my education, I don't feel like I learned very much about, which is how to deal with people. And in a company, you'll realize you really can't do very much unless you're in a team. One person can't, make a whole cell phone. You have to do it with people. But people are just a bunch of emotions, and sometimes that you have to actually manage those things more than the technical aspects. So I encourage you to brush up and learn. There's a lot of ways to learn through books or different other classes to learn about interpersonal dynamics. Some of those you might get like when you're doing group projects and you're like, oh my gosh, my partner is totally flaking out on me, right? And that's a reality. And that does happen in the real world. So all of that experience is very good. But this is a quote from a coach that I helped her with. And it's like, you probably spent many more hours being taught how to drive a car than how to navigate the rocky terrain of emotion and relationship dynamics. And actually in companies, it's mostly emotions and relationship dynamics. That's a lot of what's going on. And you think, oh, it's about the technical. The technical is just one small aspect. But navigating people, teams, bosses, employees, that's a lot. That becomes a lot more as you rise up. Okay, so that was my time at Texas Instruments. Then I decided I wanted to get international experience. So I moved to a company called MediaTek. And that's when I also switched over from being an engineer to becoming a manager. And so I started up that management ladder. And at some point, before I left, I was managing 200 people. And the team I was on was low power CPUs. We were building low power CPUs for cars, for smartphones, for IoT, all of the different products in MediaTek. And that was a great experience. The other great thing about being at MediaTek is that got to see very advanced technology nodes. So we worked in 28 nanometer planar CMOS. Then we moved to 28 nanometer high K metal, then 20 nanometer high K metal, 16 and 10 FinFET devices. And these are devices that maybe haven't been seen in products before. So companies like MediaTek, Qualcomm, Apple, they're the first to get to build in them. And then so you get to see a lot of the challenges moving to advanced process nodes, trying to build things faster, lower power, and so on. So just by virtue of being in these different technology nodes, then I got to come up with new innovations. So we got to publish papers every time we made a chip. Also was a great way to stay in the academic community with other companies that are really at the top of their game. And so I thought this is a great way to continue being innovative in my career, as well as get more experience in terms of managing people. Okay, so one thing I learned is, I'm a US born person, grew up here, worked here, and now I'm in Taiwan. And I read this paper probably after 3 years into my expat, but it was like, oh my gosh, I wish I read this paper before I went, because it explained a lot, which is that, different cultures just have very different working styles. So the way to understand this graph is that on the left-hand side is egalitarian versus the right-hand side is hierarchical. So in hierarchical, that means like people are kind of pigeonholed in different hierarchies. So And you can see egalitarian is like everything's very flat. So for example, in the US is very egalitarian. So you can go up to the CEO, hey Joe, like we're all one, we're all equal. But in Asian countries like Japan and Taiwan is kind of close to Japan. It's very hierarchical. So when I was brought in, I was a director. And when you're a director, they like bow to you, and they would escort me around like this is great, like they treated me like a queen. And so and that's because there's a very strict hierarchy in Asia or in Taiwan, where the engineers are down here, then the managers are one level up. So so that was something I didn't expect, because when I went in, I'm like, well, I want to go talk to the engineers, and I'd go show up at their cubicle, and they're like, oh, why are you here? And I'm like, I'm just a person, But no, because of the hierarchy, that was a big no-no. And I definitely crossed a lot of those boundaries. I didn't stop, unfortunately, because I didn't read the paper. I still did it, but they just had to get used to my style, egalitarian. But that's something it's really, like, I just wish I'd known, because I think I caused a lot of heart attacks. I could have, they caused less heart attacks by understanding more of it. Then on this, the y-axis is top-down versus consensual. That's about how to make decisions. And that was also very different. The US is more top-down, like we'll discuss, but once the manager makes a decision, we just all continue until we need to change the decision. So very top-down in the US, but in Asia, very consensual, meaning like we had to decide, make a big decision, which CPU should we use? We spent months in meetings discussing until like we had no more time. We were implementing this, so we just have to go with it. But that was the culture of Taiwan, which is we need everyone to buy in. If everyone buys in, it's much easier, but it takes a long time to get consensus. So that's one key thing I learned when you're going across culture. Try to understand the culture that you're going into, but at the same time, I really think you should bring your own as a differentiation. You're not going there to be like them. You're going there because they recognize you have something to offer. So bring your own differentiation. Like I don't regret going there and with my egalitarian top-down view, but I probably would have been less like confused about the consensus if I had understood more. Okay. The other thing I learned about is about work culture and things like toxic work culture. This is a really good podcast article by Adam Grant talking about the 4 deadly sins of work culture. Typically, when you think about bad work culture, you think about toxic work culture where, the company will abuse you, will give you so much work, you're working overtime, the wrong people get promoted because they're backstabbing, and, that's the one you're usually used to and try to avoid. But actually, there are 3 other toxic work culture too. One is, so there's toxicity, but then there's also mediocrity, which is like, we put relationships above results, and people are too nice, and we're too worried about getting along, and then in the end, our product doesn't go out on time, And when I read this, I'm like, oh no, that's me. And typically when, I'm too nice when it comes to management, and I realized, okay, being too nice can also cause a toxic culture. I always thought, oh, being too nice is a good trait to be a manager, but actually, no, it could be just as bad, because then you don't get results and your company can go under, The other 2 are also interesting. One is bureaucracy, which is like just tons of rules, no risk. We're just afraid of, failure. So we put in tons of rules, but many rules, then you maybe don't make any progress. And then finally, anarchy it's like all risk, no rules. I definitely experienced the bureaucratic type of environment, never luckily experienced anarchy. Um, but I think the main thing is to try to have balance and try not to fall into one of these um, for as you're rising up, as you're becoming a manager, you actually can mold the team that you're running, even if the whole company is toxic, which happens. You can provide kind of like an oasis for the people you're managing. Try to avoid these quadrants, and you manage that culture around you. And believe it or not, if you are like, I think of it like a stream of cool water, if you're not toxic, people will just naturally gravitate to you. They want to work for you. And being toxic really doesn't work in the end. It doesn't get you ahead. So try to avoid being toxic. All right. So this is an exercise that I did in 2011. It's called 100 Dreams. I put a link down there. It's a great exercise where you just sit down, write down 100 things you could possibly be or do, or achieve in your life. And every so often you can see, okay, well, maybe I can try this dream or try that dream. And you can see that, I was able to achieve a few of my dreams, like an international experience, travel all over Asia, which I did when I lived in Taiwan. I lived in California. And one of them was work at a startup. And so while I was in California, I thought this would be a good place to try that. And so I called up my friends at their startup, said, got any jobs? They're like, no. So I'm like, okay. So then I just continued working. But then a few months later, they called me up, said, this position is open, you'd be perfect for it. And so that happens a lot. You might think now's the time for me to move, but sometimes the timing is not right. But you got to put your feelers out and just let people know, hey, I would be interested in this, be interested in that. And that is part of the networking aspect. It's not necessarily like, like I build a network, I'm going to get things right away, but you have to just kind of make it known that you're interested. So I moved over to the startup in 2017. And what was great about it is like seeing my PhD research, that minimum energy point, and like becoming a product. They had a very strong company culture, good work-life balance. The manager was a little too nice. So, but overall it was very strong. Cons is this is when I had to take a very big step down corporate ladder. I was managing 200 engineers. Now it's only going to manage like 10. But I thought in terms of getting this experience would be really good. The other cons, not very stable. As I mentioned, startups, like 90% of them fail. But that was a risk that I was willing to take on in order to get this experience. And you can see the other things I wanted to do. I want to work at the White House. I don't know if anybody has a job there. Okay. All right. So at a startup, we have to be innovative because we're competing against companies like TI, Intel, large corporations. So what we did is we looked to our PhD research. We looked to research done at Michigan, UCSD, at MIT, brought those in and, made that production worthy. So that's another big thing about being in a startup is you're forced to be innovative. Because you cannot, if you're not innovative, if you're just doing the same thing as large companies, you can't compete against them. They have all the resources and the money. So what I was really grateful to be able to do is because I did have a lot of experience, and this young company, most of them straight out of school, they didn't have this experience. So when I came in, what I had to do was get their chip out the door to production. They had not been able to do that for several years. Like they had many chips that failed. So I came in, that this is how we do it in big companies. And our first tape out, we were able to make a product out of it. So that was exciting. What was our product? We called it the Everactive SOC. basically our chip was so low power that we didn't need to use batteries. We can run off of solar energy or light. We could run off of heat. And the mission of the company was to be self-powered, do not use batteries, and use wireless sensing to do renewable energy. And so very proud of the work that I did there, got to help save the environment, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, so probably the biggest challenge I faced was in 2020, and the reason why I moved back to Texas was that I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and you always think the most challenging things will be in your career, but actually the most challenging things are non-technical things. And so this picture of me going through chemo and then afterwards trying to grow my hair back. But I really believe that all of the difficulties that I've gone through my career, the Ph.D., the working overseas, the startup, were just helping me to get through this next trial. And so, you know, I learned a lot through this, and just to be grateful for what I do have. And since it's October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, just want to, you know, make people aware. If you are over 40, to get screened. If you're not, that one in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. But it was a very difficult time, but I think through it, I learned a lot and gained a lot. And without this trial, I wouldn't even be here in Texas. I'd probably be still in California. So, I'm very grateful for a very tough experience. And so what happened soon after is that, you know, I was talking about how the startup started going down. It wasn't a, you know, like a very fast thing. It was quite gradual. Had a few layoffs. When you have layoffs, you need less managers. And so, so VPs are not very useful when you have layoffs. So my job was one of the first to be thought of to be, you know, canceled. But they decided to keep me on, but just not as a manager. I went back onto the technical ladder as a fellow, but it was a very challenging time. I did think of it as a failure. I had been managing for 10 years, and now I'm like, I'm not a manager. This is really weird. But I think it was a time I need to go through where it took that away from me so I could refocus and get back into technical things and to realize, you know, my success is not based on my job or my title or my position, because unfortunately I thought it was until then. And of course, when you get cancer, like those things are not so important. But it was a time where I had to do a lot of soul searching to kind of figure out like who I was and what, where do I place my success in? And it's not in things like my job or my title. So being resilient is really important. There's going to be lots of ups and downs in your career. Failure really sucks, but instructs. Thought that was a very clever way. It's not fun to fail, but you will learn something every time. And so finally in 2024, I survived like another layoff where they again changed my role instead of actually laying me off. But I had prepared. I was like, okay, it's going to happen at some point. So let me prepare and let me think about what do I want to do after this job. I decided I didn't want to do chip design anymore. Very stressful job. The schedules are very punishing. When I started at Everactive, I had to do 2 all-nighters. I'm like, why am I doing all-nighters? I'm 40, you know, it's like not right. So I told myself, I promised myself no more of those all-nighters, and I would retire from industry, but I had to figure out what am I going to do next. And I like this quote, I see retirement is just another of those things, these reinventions, another chance to do new things and be a new version of myself. And so what I did is I used life design techniques in order to design a new life for myself. And that's why I'm here teaching. What does this new season look like? Well, a big part of it is coming to UTD and at the Department of Computer Science. I'm an EE by trade, but I like to convince CS folks that hardware is cool and exciting. And so that's what I do now. I also do a lot of volunteering. So for breast cancer awareness, there is an organization called Immerman Angels, where they pair people who've been through cancer with people who are going through it. So every so often, I'm walking along with a cancer patient. On the summers, I like to go into the prisons and help female inmates. I teach a class there on addiction recovery, but it's just really a wonderful experience to go and give back. So this new season is really about mentoring. It's really about, pouring in, sharing my experience. I mean, this to me, even today, is part of this new season, because I don't think it's about achieving like it was before. Another place that I'm very active with is in IEEE, which is the professional society, and I'm one of the founders of the Women in Circuits community or committee. We started in 2017. At that time, only 5% of our membership were female. It's pretty low. Now we're at 8%, which is good, but still very low. Our goal is 30% women by 2030, very aggressive goal. But things we do is we hold networking events at conferences. We like to bring in young people to our conferences to learn about it. We like to provide retreats for those who are working to learn about different things. And we also provide leadership opportunities for all the women in this professional society. And so I'm very proud to be a part of this. And then I'm also in a nonprofit called Nexus Mentoring, and I'd like to show a video about it.
I was inspired to start Nexus Mentoring because of the burden and passion I had for my next generation, which is namely the young adult generation, to really discover their unique identity and passions and purpose. The young adult years can be challenging, whether it's navigating through career transitions, career choices, relationships. And so this passion actually became a reality when there was an unexpected funding from a generous donor who had the same passion. So for many months, some amazing friends and advisors joined the launch team, and we started meeting, strategizing, and sharing about the unimaginable things we could do with the young adult generation. And it all ended with this new organization called Nexus Mentoring, which was founded in the fall of 2022. The most rewarding thing about Nexus Mentoring is seeing our mentors live with generosity and intentionality. All our mentors are busy professionals who have great demands at work and home, but they intentionally create space in their life to do what's important to them, namely investing in their next generation. I love just seeing them in action, interacting with the young adults, and just sharing life and wisdom with them. I also love seeing transformation among our mentees. They are working through areas of their life and soul to really grow in self-awareness, articulating their values and passions, and really sharing life together. I love seeing friendships that are being built and just them adopting a new family in their lives. My hopes for Nexus Mentoring is to see people, mentors, and mentees discover their identity, purpose, and belonging. I would love for everyone to really grow in their confidence and courage to articulate who they are, to know their life purpose and direction, and to really have people that they can call friends. If you're considering whether you should join Nexus Mentoring or not, don't hesitate, join us. We're a safe and fun community of people just doing life together. We're here to help you and to serve you to reach your full potential so that you can succeed in life and work. We're all in this journey of life together, and it's so much more rewarding when we could do it with others. So don't do life on your own, join us. I was inspired.
Okay, so Nexus Mentoring, it's a mentoring nonprofit for young adults, paired with professionals like me. We are a group and we go through a whole year doing life design, which is something, it's a framework of how do you basically apply design thinking to your own life. It's very cool. And so I took my first pod through life design this year. It was very rewarding, not just for my mentees, but for me to get to know them and to help them like both on their careers, but also on their futures. And so the next pod is going to start in January 2025. If you're interested, just go to the website and sign up. But yeah, this is again just part of this new season of life of pouring into sharing my experience and pouring into young people. Okay, so that's it. Turns out I think we're just right on time. But the summary is if you want to rise to the top, it's not a linear path. There's lots of ups and downs, and you'll face a lot of adversity and barriers. But I just encourage you, keep a learning mindset, keep growing, know yourself, be messy. Life is messy. And yeah, that's it. Any questions? Yep.
What's it like to be a manager after working in the technical side?
It was hard because like the people you were friends with are now you have to manage them. So it was very strange dynamic. And definitely as a first-time manager, you make a ton of mistakes because they don't train you and you might do things like micromanage people and like trying to control people. So sometimes when I'm talking to young people, I'm like, I go, is your manager a first-time manager? Because I can hear some of the things they're doing are very control freak-like things, which once you become a seasoned manager, you realize I just need to like enable my people, get the best people, and just let them go and not like try to control them. So yeah, I think the first time you manage is the challenges for yourself and for your team. So, you hope that the team will not suffer too much through that first experience. But then as you get more experience, you learn the best way to manage. Good question. Thanks. Yeah.
What's the reason that makes you want to work in Taiwan, and what is it like feels like to work there, like the work life?
Good question. Actually, I was like, I just want to work outside the US. And so I was like, oh, maybe Europe or but Taiwan really made a lot of sense because that's where my family's from. So my dad was living there. So that was another good reason. If I go there, then I can see him more. And also I thought, oh, my Mandarin would be helpful. I thought, but not so helpful. It was helpful, but not as helpful as I thought. And I just main thing was I thought it'd be just a great experience, big challenge. What was the second half of the question?
What does it feels like the work life?
Yeah, so it's very different. So I work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. And they fed you breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the cafeteria. They encouraged that kind of lifestyle. And so I did that. I just went in, got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And most of my coworkers are there until evening. So that was, for me, it was okay because I don't have a family. I'm single, so I can do that crazy schedule, but I really felt bad for the families. And, some of them, they go home and their kids are sleeping, so that kind of lifestyle is really tough. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Yes. Oh,
So were there any aspects of working in academia that you enjoyed more than working in the industry?
well, I really love it so far, I'll tell you. I didn't know that I would like it so much because I was thinking, oh, you're teaching the same thing every semester. But you do have a lot of autonomy and a lot of like freedom to teach in your style. So I really like that. And for me, actually teaching has been helping me with my imposter syndrome a lot because I went back, I learned computer architecture and I learned visual logic, and now I learned it so well I can teach it. So I felt like beforehand, like MIT was such a whirlwind. And when you're working, you're just trying to keep up. But now you can get very deep into the topic. And so I think it's just such a different thing than working in industry. And it's so rewarding in interacting with students, with young people. Yeah, it's very different. So I really enjoy it. And anybody who says, am I thinking about it? I'm like, gotta try it.
Am I right?
Interesting. Actually, I was looking that up. So undergrad is 46% women and 50, so it's almost half. But as you go to higher levels, it gets
And
yeah.
on the grad level, most of the students are international or native?
It's a good amount international. Yeah.
So I have a question. What was your biggest challenge you faced as a woman at MIT?
Again, I think it was mostly internal, like just not having the confidence and having a lot of negative self-talk, like why am I here? People say, you're at MIT, oh, it was good luck, or have a great advisor. You know, I think a lot of my challenges were internal when I was at MIT, because I didn't feel like they, I felt like they really supported women.
So I don't I don't understand why you mentioned you were not top student at MIT, because you got your master and PhD at MIT, and usually top student, I mean, get admission for.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this is again the negative self-talk, but I mean, I remember so many classes where I was like A/B borderline, and like tank that first test. You know that happens when you take the first test and you do terribly, and I had to like work real hard to get back up to an A. You know, so I did that so many times that I didn't really feel like I'm a top student. But a lot of getting into the PhD was connections, meeting my advisor and having the fellowship and, so I never felt like I'm the top student, but clearly I must have been to get in.
Thank you so much for your insight.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for coming, and I appreciate.
Thank you so much. Can you
Oh,
show the
yes.
survey? So we have a survey we are prepared to participate, and then we have examples that we're going to give you some tips after that.
If this is too fuzzy, I can.
Thank you so much for joining and doing this
Welcome.
for us. Thank you. We're gonna have a picture at the end, so Michelle can put it on the website. So I asked all the instructors to also join us right after the